very much. And how long about?
Until everybody walks out of the room.
I don't know if you want to.
The official time is when the big end is on the 10.
Okay.
And sometimes if it's really interesting, they'll stay here until the big end is on the 12.
Alrighty.
At 12, at that time, soup is ready downstairs, and you are invited, and everybody to socialize together in the soup kitchen.
All right, fantastic. Thank
Do
you.
you want the lights changed at all?
Yeah, let's get these front ones off, if possible. Thank you. Also an object lesson in what happens when you're absurdly passionate about something. You kind of yap about things, and it gets you pulled into this sort of thing. I hope what I say today won't in any way come across as like maybe over the top. I am very passionate about the program. I love it. I think you have to in order to do what we do. As Dr. Gibbons said, this is going to be mostly about what it's like to actually be in the studio environment. But before we get into that, I figure it's kind of like football. You know, it'd be hard to explain to someone what it's like to play football if you don't exactly know how football is played or what football is. And our program is really kind of like that. It's very different from most of the other programs at BYU, or in general. Very different from a lot of the other animation programs even. So I wanted to start off actually, how many of you guys are familiar with the animation program here? Anybody? Quite a number? Anybody seen any of their features? Okay, a couple, awesome. Has anybody seen Dreamgiver? Yes? Alright. For those of you that have not seen it, I actually wanted to start with that, kind of give people an idea of what it is that we do.
Is this one available online when the other ones haven't been allowed?
That is a wonderful question.
I was wondering that.
That is a very, very good question. When I was preparing for this, I kind of got curious. I'm like, I wonder if there's like any little 2-minute clips, like a preview type of thing.
Yeah.
And awkward. The whole thing is online. So most of them are not, for various reasons. But for some reason, it looks like the director for this one got permission to post it. I don't know why. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what it is that we do. I think it's important to point out as we start to transition into the studio environment that it is a big collaborative effort. That's a lot of credits, and there are a lot of people that get together to work on this stuff. When I was talking to Andy earlier, he talked about how more and more places are starting to consider doing a studio environment, incorporating that into their program. I think this program is an example of how successful it can be. They ran an article on BYU. Did anybody see that thing that was talking about the most pinged thing that BYU got hit for? It was that film. You know, the program is getting noticed. All of these movies and more, they're 10 for 10 on student Emmys. I'd hate to be that group that eventually doesn't get the Emmy. Awkward. But it is getting noticed. Was anybody here when Ed Catmull, president of Pixar, came and talked? His words, all of a sudden in the last few years we found BYU has risen to the top. Studio environment works. It's very different from what most of the other programs do. And I'll say it was very different from anything I'd ever done before. Pixar, by the way, is not the only one that notices. DreamWorks, for example, was here about 3 weeks ago. They had a couple of reps out talking to us, critiquing us on our current film. Or Sony ImageWorks, or Pixar was again out here. It's getting noticed by all sorts of people. The real difficulty, though, in the whole thing, in the studio environment, what the challenge of it is getting an idea, one single idea, from just in someone's head to on paper, and then into a film, for those of you that have seen Pajama Gladiator. That is surprisingly difficult. Has anybody ever worked in a big collaborative team thing on one project before? In here? Yes? Was it always fun? No, like, believe me when I say, like, I love this stuff, but sometimes it is hell. Like, it is so hard. But it's wonderful at the same time. to give you another quick idea of what it's like, here's a little time lapse. We're currently working on a film that we're going to be done with later this week called Estefan. It'll probably be a few weeks before it's actually available to be viewed. But that was the first film that I've worked on with the program. Here is what's called a push. A push is where all of the people in one particular department get together and push until that particular aspect is done. Making these films is kind of like an assembly line. You know, for example, what I do is basically the equivalent of sculpting, but on the computer. And then I'll also take those objects and I'll paint them. So, other people, like these guys, these were the people that light everything. Everything that you see on the screen, like that, none of it's made with real world assets. It's not like making a normal movie where most of the work's done, all you have to do is just push record. Every single thing in the pipeline has to be thought about and done by a person. And this is just one team going at it. So, here's a little time lapse of them going. If you want to just, by the way, watch one person, this girl in the red right there, later pulls her blanket over her. I think they started at like 5 in the afternoon and went till about 4 in the morning. Something like that. Oh, let's go back. Usually starts off kind of slow while people trickle in. But yeah, you see people laying on the floor taking their little power nap. Everybody going off to dinner. People taking more power naps if you watch the girl on the green. But it's a lot of sitting in front of.
So I did a master's degree in computer engineering.
Uh-huh.
And the labs were kind of like this.
Yeah.
Where you go in at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there was more activity in the lab at 2 in the morning than than at 3 in the afternoon or something. And I'm just wondering, are the people in this program married? I'm just wondering if there's a culture that's created that doesn't support or sustain family life in a positive way, or how students deal with that in this kind of environment. And if this, one other question I have related is, do you get people within this design and studio environment to become very, very good at one little thing like building rocks?
Right.
And how does that really transfer to a different environment? Or do they typically go into their work environment and build rocks, and that's just what they become good at, and they're not really learning the whole thing?
Yeah, very, very good question. And by the way, if anybody's got questions, throw them out. I love to hear that more than I love to just endlessly yap. Reason, though, that I asked how long he wants me to go is because I could do it, especially talking about this. As far as the weird little culture we developed, it is weird. You start to see people, like, here, let me show you. We're a very weird bunch, partly because of what it is that we do. Like,
well,
if you
I think
watch...
one thing to know about 210 is this was a push. That's
yeah.
not every day. It's not even every week.
Right.
It's like when deadlines are hit.
Yes.
So,
Which is every month.
Well, usually, each team, like, as I said, weird. If anybody knows what RGB is, it's a computer thing, it's a design thing. Anyways, with the marriage culture thing, yes, it can put a strain on it, but it's only at certain times.
So how often do you have a push?
Usually you'll have 1 or 2 pushes per month, but they're not like this. This is we're finishing the film. A normal push would be you go in at Saturday morning at like 7 in the morning and you go till 1 in the afternoon, just together, where you can critique each other and bounce ideas. So, as far as marriage stress, the people in the program that are married, sometimes their wives or husbands will hang out in our basement, just because otherwise they don't see their spouse, which is kind of sad, but that's what it can be during a push. But fortunately, the faculty are very supportive of that. Like, for example, Brent, one of our faculty, constantly invites the spouses over to his house to have dinner with his wife during these pushes. And
Were the faculty there during the push?
sometimes.
I think there are industries that develop this culture. The Googleplex is really cool, you know, and
Right.
they've got all these neat things, and they've got places where you can go and sleep. My husband, we were living in the Bay Area, and he interviewed with them, didn't get the job, but I said, if you get this job, you're not allowed to have dinner at their cafeteria every night, you know, because, I mean, you take young people with a lot of energy and the willingness to just stay, but it can definitely work against family life, and so, but I think that there are some industries that kind of just thrive on that,
Yeah.
and
And have to have it be that way.
and they support it, that, and they do create, their whole Googleplex may help sustain them.
Yeah.
At the same time, if I was studying medicine or law, or even accounting at the advanced level, you know, there are times of stress, and we have, among our leaders, many lawyers and doctors, and that's the price that has to be paid for sometimes a short period of time.
Yeah. And I want to actually return to that point towards the end here. Another question?
Just to add to the examples, you know, I've led software development teams before. It's exactly the same kind of thing. You know, it's normal work for weeks at a time, and then we call them sprints. And then it's a sprint where everybody comes back, you know, goes home, eats dinner, comes back at 7, and we go till 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And it's the same thing. My undergrad's in music, and it's the same thing during show week, whether it's an opera or a musical or whatever. You roll in at 6 o'clock every night. And then it's every night for a week or for 2 weeks, right? It's run the show, run it till 1 in the morning, do it again the next night, do it again the next night. Then you open on Thursday,
Yeah.
show runs. You know, so it's not just this studio environment. This
Right.
is this idea of sprints or pushes or times of great intensity. I think are shared in common between any kind of really high quality creative output.
Yeah, I believe that. To answer your question really quick to the second one, yes, people get somewhat pigeonholed, but not so much that they're only making rocks. Pigeonholed to the point where they're only sculpting. For example, the software that we use to do all of this stuff is $3,500, and it's huge. You can do the whole film in it. And so, it's basically the difference between being an oral surgeon versus being an orthodontist versus being a dentist. Each part of the software is so complicated and takes so much practice to be able to use that you have to kind of pigeonhole.
So are people within your program, are you deciding, for example, I want to be a sculptor
Yes.
within an animation program, and so you're specializing in that way, and that's what you want to do. You don't really need to know the other
Yeah.
aspects.
Yep, exactly. In fact, when I very first started this, I was asking questions to the people that have been in the program for 4 years, and they would just shrug their shoulders. I don't know. I'm an animator. I'm not a lighter. Go ask him. So, very normal.
And those are job categories out in industry as well.
Yeah, and that's what the great thing about a studio environment is that it's supposed to mirror, kind of, to some extent at least, what a real job environment is like.
So how much, I'm going to use some of Andy's jargon here, but how much of the languages of the other jobs do you need to know to be able to perform your job and interact with them?
That's a very good question. In fact, I'll answer that in a minute. That's a very good question. It can take over even your personal life when I go home for the weekends. That is normal. But how they get to the point where you got the whole film coming together, when I first started on this film, what they did is they emailed me style guides. And this is just an example of one, for example, for Estefan, right? This is how we want everything in the Estefan world to look. Because it has to look like all one person made it, even though there's 100 people that worked on it. So we match color, we match the different shapes and things like that, how things are proportioned, and then they give us examples of what things in that particular world would look like. But that doesn't always run smoothly. For example, here's please.
Back at the previous slide, the one with the Bureau
Looks
of
like the
Norse,
60s or
the style sheet.
This one?
Next
No,
one.
forward,
This
forward,
here?
forward.
No,
No,
other.
Other forward.
That one.
That one.
This one, okay.
So the style there is that certain aspects of elements are exaggerated in a
Yes.
certain way. So there's like a principle running through these, an invisible principle in the way these things are exaggerated. For another, and the surfaces are applied. In another production, there might be a different style of exaggeration that was round instead of angular and,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep. And different color sets too. You know, Estefan is very warm, whereas Dreamgiver used a lot of, you know, darker hues, purples and blues. Here's a shot that I worked on for Estefan. For example, there was a challenge in getting this fan thing to match Estefan's world. And there can be a lot of difficulties even with the people above you in communicating what they want. That's another challenge of the studio environment. For example, you asked, do you kind of specialize? It's not like you just pick some random subject and then go do it. You do what you're good at so you can rise kind of up through the levels. And the people at the top are like kind of lead people, if that makes sense. And so my modeling lead told me to make a fan. Normally you've got a concept like this to at least work from, that a design person will go through and make. I didn't have one, and so the first one that I made was very, very different. This is the software that we use. It's called Maya. How it works is you'll basically work on an object or whatever and then email back and forth with your lead, asking for help with this technical problem or that. Like, see example, I've gone through and circled some things in red that were just causing weird issues in the model. And then she would email back and say, try this to fix it, try that to fix it. And sometimes communication just doesn't work very well, especially when you're first learning the process. For example, I finished this whole model basically, and then turned it in, and she turned it in to her person, and her person came back and said, that doesn't fit Estefan's world at all. And so then you have to go through and get back to this point, start over. So there can be some frustrations in it. Another model I did, this time I had a concept to work on. Someone that specializes in how things look. Not modeling, not anything else, they just do quick paintings and say this is for the Estefan world. And then you make it into 3D. I sculpted and painted that, and then when it puts into the film it looks dramatically different even from what I did. It's just a big collaborative thing. But there is a lot of encouragement in it. That same lead that I had a hard time with determining what we want would send out these funny little emails trying to encourage us and help us along. A little bit of Star Wars in there, I think. But on the other hand, like, even though it can be frustrating, it's an absolute joy. It can take a lot of time. I remember one Wednesday I started on a project that had to be done that day. At 7 in the morning, went till 12, 8, started again at 12:30 and went till 12:45 a.m. And so it can be really time consuming, but it's what we love. So here's another piece worked on, and this is more towards the end. It's like in any studio environment, I think when people first start to try and figure out how to make it work, as in anything, it's hard, you hit bumps, it drives you crazy, you think about quitting. But you push through, and towards the end you figure it out and you love it. You know, it's also a lot of fun to be able to sit down at the end and say, okay, yeah, it was frustrating, but here are my chairs, here's my picture frame, and here's my, you know, just be able to say, awesome, cool, it's done.
What's the utility function? I mean, it takes a lot of people, a lot of time to produce 5 minutes worth of video. What is the payoff?
The payoff, there was a guy that wrote a book on film theory and things like that. He basically, to quote him, said, Hollywood is a big dumb shark that eats money. And that's what this kind of thing is. It makes a lot of money. It's a good paying profession. It's the only art profession that I'm aware of where I can walk out of school and make $50K starting. And the movies themselves, you know, Toy Story 3, that was gigantic.
So, what is it that makes people want to spend money on it?
On investing it, or just
Why
to go see it?
Why couldn't it just be a storybook? I'm not asking this from an adversarial point of view. I'm trying to draw out a point that I want some of my students to hear, actually. I could say it in so many
Don't make
words,
him
but
guess
that
it,
would
Andy, just
spoil
say
it. What happens in that 5 minutes that wouldn't happen if you videotaped yourself telling the story and waving your hands or maybe holding up some pictures? What happens? What's the magic of 5 minutes of this?
Anybody want to swing at that?
It's an experience. You live it.
You live it. It's the goal of making film generally is to create an emotionally satisfying experience.
There we go.
That's it. Thank you.
It's also creating any sort of pop art is a great deal of surfing waves of fad and current culture. The movies that people flocked to and had incredible, even spiritual experiences in the 30s and 40s can't even draw a half a house today. And so you have to remain current and up to date. And when I'm seeing these sketches, I'm seeing a lot of inspiration, whether it's implicit or explicit, from the Ratatouille concept art.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to have your finger on that pulse, simultaneously pioneering while leveraging existing material.
Yeah.
So you're saying I should stop watching The Gone with the Wind?
Makes you cry when you watch it.
What'd you say? Can't show it
So started it on yourself.
Once you're done doing your sculpting and painting and all that sort of thing, how many stories could you potentially, or how many films could you potentially do with what
Those
you've
assets?
created? Yeah.
A lot. That's how, for example, they can make, like if you've seen on Nickelodeon, they've got little 3D type of shows because of that principle. It's not as high quality, of course. Like I'm sure most people here saw.
well all together.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people saw Kung Fu Panda, the movie. Has anybody seen Kung Fu Panda, the TV series?
Legends of Awesomeness.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the name of the TV series.
But not quite as awesome.
There is a dramatic, if you watch and compare the two, there is a dramatic quality drop, but they basically can just take those assets they made for the movie, port them over, and use them for making a series, and it's doable to make a show every week. It's making the assets that takes hands down the longest. You know, someone has to go through and first design it and then sculpt it, and then someone has to take that sculpture and make it so the character can bend and move without breaking, and they break a lot.
Do you use any of the kind of technology where you,
We don't.
is that a next step up in complexity or what?
No, it just kind of looks weird a lot of the times. It's getting better, but that technology just sometimes looks bizarre. Like, did anybody see the Polar Express? Yes. Like, they just looked weird. Like, really, really weird. And the reason why is because a lot of it was motion capture, and because of some of the stupid choices the director made, like not wanting the eyes to show emotion. Whatever.
Well, and on that note, actually, there was quite a kerfuffle when Happy Feet got nominated for an animation Oscar because it's not animation, it's motion capture. And animators animate things. They don't record somebody else doing it and then and then map that to a 3D figure. Similarly, on Nick Jr., the program Backyardigans, which is notable for its music and dance, more than its graphic animation. But they initially wanted to use motion capture. And then the director's comment was, we had to realize that our characters' hands did not extend above their heads. Because they have these enormous heads and these truncated bodies. And so they had to go, and now what they do is they videotape the dancers, and then the animators mimic that. But motion capture is, it's good for some things, but it's not applicable in much animation.
Totally true. And a lot of the times they wed the two together. And they will shoot it in as a base with motion capture, and then they'll go through and fix it. So.
I was going to make a comment about something else I think is really interesting, is you talk about all the time that went into a 5-minute video. And you talk about, oh, these are my chairs. To be honest, if I looked here, I wouldn't have even noticed the chairs, but you spend how much time on those chairs?
Insane.
It's insane. And I've heard Brent talk about that over there, where he'll say, if you're in charge of something, do something to make it special, even if nobody else will notice. And part of that's to create a portfolio. But part of it also is that by everybody having a little bit of autonomy, so that they all have to match a certain color scheme, but they have some liberty in trying to make their own work special. Add in some new dialogue, or add in a particular kind of funny little shaped object. It's all of that effort to be passionate about your little niche that ends up making these films so fun.
Yeah.
Because there's little Easter eggs of goodness along the way. As you're going along, and you're like, that's just a really funny facial expression right there, that somebody spent all day Saturday doing for no reason other than they thought it would be a funny facial expression.
Yeah.
You know, but that kind of passion makes the whole, and that kind of ownership over your own aspect of the work makes the whole work so much better.
When you have a film that you're making that involves characters that have to interact and their personalities interact, I'm thinking of the one with the bull in it. Weren't there other characters that had to interact with the bull?
Oh, Las Piñatas?
The piñata. Is there somebody who advocates for the characters, for the different characters? So,
Yeah.
so they take on that persona and they argue for their character and what ought to happen during the
Yes.
story. So there's another specialized niche. It's
Story is the niche I want to go into. I don't care too much, like modeling and texturing is fun, but eventually that's where I want to go.
If you were working on, say, your chair, and halfway through you had to, for some reason, stop, how difficult would it be to get another person to come in and pick up where you left off to finish your asset?
It depends. If I did things right, then it wouldn't be hard. If I did things wrong, it would be very hard.
How often do you do things right?
I don't like getting ugly emails, so I try to do them right pretty consistently.
And what you're talking about is project management.
Yeah.
Putting assets in the correct places and having them done the correct way so that people can find them and share them and communicate them easily.
And Tanner, isn't there also an element of how your piece has to fit within the rest, so there's this standard interface that's expected? You're expected to do things in a certain way.
Yep.
And deliver them in a certain package so they can be easily dropped into, would you call that modularity? I would.
Because he would.
Yeah. I don't know if I would call it that. I just call it. I call it librarian, which is the system we use to check it in and out, and I have not thought about it past that. So, it just goes back to the, you guys focus on this, we focus on that. To answer more of the question on picking something up, I didn't sculpt this object. At least I didn't start it. As I was going through doing it and watching also, what we do in the beginning is we create something called an animatic. And that's like a quick hand-drawn version of what the eventual film is going to be. And then we slowly update it as shots get finished so that we can see the final product in the end. I watched the animatic, realized that this object was going to be seen from an angle that would make it look ridiculous in its current form. And so I had to pick it up. Like, it didn't have this roof. It was just like that. And it was going to be seen from this angle. And it doesn't look good. And so had to go in and add that. So a lot of the times you do have to pick other people's work up. So, and there was other things you had to tweak and change too. So.
Tell us about the leadership roles that students play in that studio model.
In the studio model, how it works is we've got a director and a producer. The producer is over the scheduling of it all, making sure we actually get done on time, motivating people along, and then a director. And these are both students. The director is over the overall artistic feel of the movie. And so one leader will keep it on that line while the other keeps things actually moving forward. And then below them you've got leads like my texturing lead, helps me figure out how to solve all my painting problems, or my sculpting lead helps me figure out how to solve all of those problems. But it is very student-based. It's, if the students didn't drive it, there would be no film.
Are those leads people who just have developed expertise outside of the program, so they're able to take on a leadership role, or are they somehow nurtured within the program so that they are able to, I mean, because it's not like you have graduate students and undergrads,
Right.
Or people who've had experience before that are helping people.
Right.
I mean, you all start.
Right. It's all your own skill. Like, there is no nurturing. In fact, an interesting thing about the program is we've only got 5 faculty, and most of them don't do much teaching. Like, they do. We have classes, but they do a lot of managing the program and fundraising and getting us jobs, and then they tell us to run along and figure things out. And we do. That's what we have to do.
Well, I think, the students, though, are able to work on, so you have like senior projects, but you have students that are beginning in the program that are able to help out on the senior projects. And so, I mean, that is on their own time, but at the same time, they're also able to learn from the leaders, and they have that kind of scaffolding that the instructors have allowed to be there. They've given them that kind of an opportunity, which I think really helps them to take on those leadership roles.
And it builds awesome networking.
Yeah.
It's really well designed. That's actually me. Like, I am very young in the program, and the reason I'm helping on this senior film is because I want to learn. Because someday I want to do more than the chair. So, were there other hands that I missed?
Which I think is interesting because you're getting absolutely no credit, right? I'm assuming you're a sophomore, so you're not in the class. You're not getting a grade. You're not getting credit. You're getting paid for it?
No.
No. You're doing this just because you want to learn something.
Yeah.
And eventually have the expertise to be able to, do what you want to do with it.
Make the main character type of thing, or get a good job.
So, I'm curious, what your, the things that you're doing, like the chairs and things like that, have you been able to use that for your assignments in your animation classes?
Not
or is
really.
it completely extra? So, like, how many credits are you taking, and like how manageable, like what is your week like? I'm just curious.
My week, it depends on what part of the film we're talking about. Like, if we're talking like 5 months ago, my week was pretty normal. I'm taking 12 credits. I can't take more than that because then it just goes absolutely crazy. Now I'm done with my parts, and people are just polishing the film. I don't do a thing anymore. But during the final push of my department, those few weeks, those were kind of hard. So.
And you're not, are you working on top of?
Yeah, that's
oh
how.
yeah, you are. You're downstairs, right?
Yeah, if you see me walking around,
Right.
I'm more used to making these podiums work than I am standing at the podiums.
That's right.
So, it is extremely time-consuming. Unfortunately, you do lose some friends. Unfortunately, things get neglected. It's just a matter of prioritizing. It's a sad, unfortunate part of being in the top competitive realms of anything, and that's what it is.
What have you seen as your most difficult challenge with the studio environment? Something that maybe you didn't expect when you were going into it, but kind of hit you sideways?
You remember that fan? So that was probably the most difficult thing. I'd done things on the film before, but that was my most frustrating thing. Reason why is I get handed that assignment, I draw up a concept of what I think it should look like in the end, and I hand it back to my lead, and she thumbs up it. And then I go and I spend 20 hours working on it, hand it back to her, she says, yeah, looks great. And then she hands it to her people, and then has to hand it back. And she was being really vague in her emails, and I think I eventually asked her, I was frustrated at that point. I think I asked her something along the lines of, why couldn't we just hand the concept to the developer people in the first place? And then, sure, like, I probably could have handled that a little bit later, but then, like, the next day to be sitting, working on something, look over my shoulder at her computer, and she's got lists of all of the people that are under her, and see a note next to her thing that says hard to work with, like, that's a wake-up call for me. Like, I don't want that on my name. No. Right? That's hard and frustrating because you pour 20 hours into something. The other person was kind of the one that botched, but in a studio environment, learning how to cooperate and just forget, forgive, and move on is essential. So for me, learning how to just totally be okay with working with other people and being okay with their mistakes.
I'm interested about lifelong learning within this industry. Do people go into a job, I mean, how do they sustain their passion? Is it because they're doing art, or are they allowed to expand their skill set, move to more complicated projects or more complicated movies, or do they expand by moving into managerial roles? Or, I mean, how do they maintain the energy, that level of energy for so long? Or you just have young people in the industry and then they drop out and do other things later, or do they stay their whole lives and progress in some way?
Are you answering, or is this another question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of address that. It's like working in anything you love. Because I'm again in the program with I'm sorry, I can never remember your name.
It's okay,
But,
Tanner.
Yeah, I've seen you in the lab a lot. But it's like doing anything that you're passionate about. I mean, you're going to continue to be hungry to learn more about that thing. It's anything you really enjoy. If you make that into your job, then you're always going to want to learn more and improve at it, and you're going to keep that passion and that flair for it alive. At least that's, I don't know, been what I've seen and noticed.
And I would add that once you get into a career and you have your specialty set, there's not a lot of lateral movement, and so you're going to be doing what you did for pretty much the rest of your career. So you really want to do something that you are passionate about. You certainly don't want to get yourself into a job where when you're 50 years old, you've already had your 40-year midlife crisis, and now you're having your 50-year midlife crisis, and you realize there's going to be another one at 60. You don't want to put yourself in that position where you start questioning, where's the fun and how much longer do I have to do this? You don't want to get into work that you're not enjoying. If you're gonna be a family person, be a family person 100%, become the best one you can. If you're going to become a professional person, become like Richard Sudwick and know everything about it that everyone ever wants to know. Become the best that you possibly can in what you do. Well, that I wasn't supposed to do that, sure. I'm sorry. Back to you, Tanner.
There's another thing as well. In places like Pixar, for example, they're not just focused on the innovation, but they've got community, which they say is higher on their priority list than the production itself. And part of the community is they have their own university where everyone is taking classes in subjects that are not their area. So while in this type of in that environment, you are specializing in whatever it is that you're specializing. But in order for ideas in the network to be really fruitful, they've created the university so that top level there's no it's all just level, and you're constantly being inspired by other people and getting to know people that that you wouldn't otherwise know, and so that also helps to I think and they think helps to keep it alive.
Totally true. I think that also because of the nature of this particular field, the people that get into animating and things like that have that drive that they just want to do this and they're willing to do whatever it takes and they like pushing the boundaries. She's not real. That's somebody pushing the boundaries. It's his wife, so it's okay. But it's part of any industry, pushing it further and further and further, going as far as you can.
So that's
not real.
That's computer generated?
Yeah. And it's his wife. Yeah, when he showed his wife, she's like, whoa. And he showed her, okay, here's you without hair, and here's you without skin. So amazing how far things can be pushed. But most of it, I think, as Annie was talking about, is just driving to become the best.
So, do you have 50-year-olds in the animation industry that are the best, that kind of mentor and help the other ones coming up?
And there's a monetary value in it too. I mean, just like any other career, the higher you rise, the more you earn. I don't know if anybody's heard of Glenn Keane, animated Tarzan, for example, the character Tarzan in that movie. The guy makes like $300,000 a year. That's awesome. No other art job really does that, and so that's a good motivator for any artist that doesn't want to live in a box. So, were there other questions I missed on that?
So a few minutes ago, you made an interesting point. You talked about priorities, and then you said that at the time you didn't have a lot of friends, but that's just kind of that's the way it goes, right? It's kind of
right.
This is going to come across a little harsher.
No,
and I don't mean it that way.
No.
I'm curious, as an artist, what is it about this that has set this as a priority over friendship or over some of these other relationships? I think.
Yeah, no, that is a very good question, and I want to use that as a transition. And I hope I didn't give the impression that I don't have any friends. I do. Thank you.
That's why we invited you, Tanner.
It was, thank you. It was, it's kind of a matter of picking which friends you want to keep the closest and then pouring lots of time into them and not having 100 friends instead of having your dozen that you're close with type of thing. So kind of ward acquaintances that I used to spend multiple days with a week studying in the library, that kind of got jettisoned. Things like that. But nonetheless, it is a matter of priority, like prioritizing. What causes you to say, okay, I've got these ward friends that I'm really close with. Why is this so important that you would jettison it? That's why, to me. This is Spencer W. Kimball, talk he gave in 1967. Take a Da Vinci or a Michelangelo or a Shakespeare and give him a total knowledge of the plan of salvation of God and personal revelation and cleanse him. Then take a look at the statues he will carve, the murals he will paint, and the masterpieces he will produce. Take a Handel with his purposeful effort, his superb talent, his earnest desire to properly depict the story, and give him inward vision of the whole true story and revelation and what a master you have. And he goes on in this talk and talks about how we should have LDS people, because of this knowledge, in the top sphere of every walk of life. In this talk he calls for statesmen. In this talk he calls for businessmen. LDS people to rise to the top wherever they're at, in whatever way they can, to rise up and represent the church. So for me, why? I kind of see it as a little weird way of missionary work. It's coming home from my mission and seeing my 8-year-old brother listening to a very popular song that I'm not going to point out, and then hearing it again on BYU campus and know the lyrics of that song. People will have their daily bread of entertainment, regardless of whether or not that bread is stale or rotten. For me, this is a little bit of missionary work and rising up and at least giving clean, wholesome entertainment.
Just from the stories I've heard from my husband, he has a week, but he has heard many things about how people who come out of the BYU program, when they're at the companies they go to, they know who you are, and they actually expect you to live up to the standards that they know that you had to live while you were here. And so I've heard stories of people getting fired because they were doing things they weren't supposed to do, that the people knew that they weren't. Anyway, they weren't living up to BYU standards that they knew that they had, that they knew who they were. And so that in that same realm, we need to continue to be, wholesome and do what we're supposed to, even if we are in our own trust. I think it's great that BYU has had that reputation. What's the word I'm looking for? With the animation business, is that they know how you're supposed to be, and so they respect you for that.
Yeah.
I anticipate that some people in the room are listening to you talk about the level of commitment that you've made. They're thinking that you're a little bit kooky, perhaps on that level. But just point blank, do you think it's possible to really make things that are great without the level of commitment that you guys are putting you in the studio?
No. From first-hand experience, I say no.
I have no idea.
Who's Bronco Mendenhall football coach who puts football fifth on their priority list?
But that doesn't mean he stays home from his recruiting trips.
No, but it means his people go home at 6 o'clock at night. They have, they have very structured, very intense professional time, and then they have the. I'm just saying there's a different view.
But I bet they have push weeks too.
He's taking me for it. He's got in trouble for it. For not taking it as seriously as some people.
Well, I think it's an interesting question that we as LDS people have to grapple with, because we value excellence, like you're saying, but we grapple with setting priorities and trying to determine what's best versus what's good versus what's essential or whatever, and I don't think any of us can make that decision for anyone else, but it's good to see these kinds of things, because if you didn't go into the industry with your eyes wide open, it might be hard to make the decisions that you have to make to be excellent and know how to prioritize. I mean, maybe you're cutting out some of the mediocre friendships and you're prioritizing those out, but you're maintaining your most critical and crucial, or whatever. I mean, I know when I was in graduate school, we always talked about it's a time when your life is out of balance, because you have a lot of things. A lot of the people that I was in graduate school with weren't married, they didn't have families, they didn't have a lot of the commitments and the priorities that we had to have it. And yet we couldn't use that as an excuse to not be excellent. We couldn't say, well, I have a family, so I can't be excellent. But we did have to be maybe more careful about structuring our time, prioritizing out things that were, not as essential.
Right.
And so I think it's been helpful to hear what you have to say, and I hope you don't feel offended that we've asked hard questions, but I mean, it's good to know these kinds of things.
Can I say one more thing? Just with the time constraint, you guys see how they were there in the studio for hours. If you think about it, these are all students who do have their full class while they're still taking. So when they actually go into the industry, their time is going to be during their work time instead of during their class time kind of thing. So the studios will still push, when they have their end of when their goals and everything. But, my husband his schedule has been pretty normal, and I, take him lunch or dinner and everything. But the only time I've really never seen him is at the end of the semester when he's either finishing class projects or at the push. So it really is not that detrimental. They have that joke that I'm an animation widow, for all the wives and husbands or whatever. But yeah, with all those, it's the same thing. But it mainly is just because they don't have the time during the day when they're taking their classes or working to be able to put it into the studio. So I haven't found much of a issue with him being gone that long, because I knew what I was getting into in the first place. But it's been it's a big deal because, or it's been a really good thing, because now he knows that he can do it, and without taking classes, he'll be just fine. When he's in the field, I guess you could say. But the studio times, when their work times are going to be normally during the day.
Yeah. And Pixar averages what, 40, 50-hour work weeks.
Yeah.
Normal. So, as you said, disproportionate crazy time now. If you listen to any of Elder Holland's talks when he was president at BYU, he talks about his schooling years. They were crazy. He talks about, I remember one story, he talks about his dad that he hadn't seen in forever coming to visit, and he wanted to go take him on a tour of the city, but he had a paper due. You do your work now.
Would you make yourself available offline after this so that we can follow up and learn more from you about what you do?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Because we know you've nothing else to do.
It's calmed down a lot since my push part is over. It's been nice. Closing thought. Anybody see this guy's Devo yesterday? He's an example of someone that's risen to the top. that's making the best out of what he's got in his career. He's not an animator. I'm not a statistics SPSS person. This guy, I don't know if I'm going to vote for him. I'm not about to preach politics, but you know, he's doing missionary work in his own way. I've heard more than one reporter say, why not vote for a Mormon? High values, look at this guy's family. It's rising to the top, fulfilling this challenge to be in the top sphere of every part of life. And really, it's just our own way of going about doing good. So, I would just encourage all of you, you know, I don't know what the top spheres of what you do is, but anywhere in the world there's a place where an LDS person can make a difference. And if that means you have to sacrifice a little here and there to do it, do it. And I don't know whether to say these things in the name of Jesus Christ or what.
Thank you.